It's Representative Jess Hanson. She served Savage and Northwest Burnsville in the state legislature since 2021. She grew up, this is relevance, she grew up in poverty, and her life has brought her on a journey from being a high school dropout and teen mom to a first-generation college graduate, a solo parent and homeowner, an experienced professional and an educator, and 3-term state legislator. She earned a Bachelor of Science in Social Work from St. Catherine University and a Master of Arts in Advocacy and Political Leadership from Metropolitan State University. And just, I mean, can we call you that? She's co-vice chair of the Children and Family Finance Policy Committee and also serves on the Higher Education and Taxes Committees. She co-teaches the Model Legislature course at Metropolitan State University, where she brings young people to St. Paul for a 2-day mini session where they perform as legislators by electing leaders, participating in committees, and debating and voting on bills. And today she's here to talk to us about child protection legislation currently before the legislature. Please welcome Representative Jess Hanson.
Yeah. Do you want me to use this microphone or this one?
Whichever.
This one? I guess there's a little one, yeah. So little baby microphones today. So
As long as people can hear you.
yeah, I have a loud voice, so I'll project. Thanks for having me. I'm Representative Jess Hanson. I'm from Savage and Burnsville, as you heard. I'm in my 3rd term. I serve as the co-vice chair of the Children and Families Committee, and that's the committee that's responsible for the new department in Minnesota, which is DCYF, or the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. Historically, child protection was housed under DHS, which obviously is a conglomerate, which can have add a lot of complications to child protection execution. We have a county-based system, so state policies executed by an 87-county system, which is unique for the country, but we like that here in Minnesota by and large. So there's challenges with that when it comes to a lot of things, but child protection is one of the things that really has struggles with that 87-county system. So there's been conversations about centralizing that at the state, but I think that's a 10-20-year discussion that probably isn't going to happen anytime soon. So historically, our child protection system has been among the worst in the country. When I got into the legislature, we found that I discovered and found the data that showed that we have one of the most racist child protection systems as well. As you know, Minnesota was home during many moons ago when settlers came here and moved natives, forced natives onto reservations. And boarding schools was a really popular thing here in Minnesota and obviously across Canada and other parts of the country as well. And what we saw from those policies of boarding schools were very evident in what we were still doing in our child protection system. Separating families, separating children from their culture. We all have heard the terrible saying, kill the Indian, save the man. That was very present in today's child protection system as well. And so we understand that when kids are removed from their culture, removed from something that is genetically something they have an identity with, they do worse in life. And so when we intervene in the child protection system, we want to make sure that we're prioritizing family preservation, even if it's not with the parents who can provide them a safe and loving and full home, it's still with family or close kin who can do that as well. So one of the first bills I passed in my very first session was a bill that said Minnesota will prioritize family preservation. And what that means is that if you have a grandbaby who their parents aren't able to provide for them, that we will come to their grandparents, their aunts, their uncles, their friends first, and their family and their network to find a loved one to take care of them first, before we just put them in a stranger's home. That act of taking a child out of a family placement into a stranger's home is extremely traumatic. If you have any friends who have been through the child protection system, regardless of what age you're in, I bet they would have a story if they went to a stranger's home to this day that is still hard for them to talk about. And so it's important we understand this lifelong impact this has on kids. As a kid who had a lot of trauma growing up, I've also had access to a lot of therapy and superhero genes or something that has allowed me to really overcome a lot of what other people don't overcome. And so I try to use this opportunity in my life to really reach back and make sure we can help kids as well. So I passed this bill to prioritize family preservation. And what does that mean, like in practice, right? If a call comes into our police department, any police department, sheriff's office, and they have to go to the home and they realize this kid is not safe here, then rather than the old days, that officer would take that child for an emergency placement and generally would go to the closest foster parent in town, which they already have an established relationship with. To the system, that felt like it worked, right? The police officer knows this foster mom or dad who's been providing care for kids. This person's a good human. They take care of children who aren't theirs on emergencies, and it worked out. Now we require that those officers ask a kid, any kid over 8 years old, do you have someone in town that you know? Does mom have a good friend? Does your aunt live nearby? Do you have a grandparent? And we ask them first. Because if a kid says, yeah, my mom's best friend lives across the street, that's way better for the child's long-term development and to lower the impact of the trauma in that situation, to let them, for an emergency placement, stay with someone they know versus going to a stranger's house. Despite the convenience it places on the system, this is more important. So a lot of it was a grappling with convenience versus what's right. The other thing that I passed was a bill called, I created an office for a youth foster ombudsperson. And so this office now is an ombudsperson that is just for kids in the foster system. We've all heard stories of caseworkers who have too big of caseloads or they can't manage the caseload. And so these kids kind of end up in this situation where if they're faced with an opportunity to exchange, let's say, money for sex, if they're faced with an opportunity to get involved in a gang, if they're faced with an opportunity to sell drugs because they want to feed themselves, they may take that, right? Over having an important adult in their corner. If their caseworker is just too busy, they can't really protect them from some of those easy opportunities for predatory behaviors. And so this gives them an office where they can go. This office is now going around the state. They meet with kids in foster homes, in group homes, in treatment centers. Whenever the kids want to call, they can call that office and they have an advocate or a watchdog in their corner. I passed this bill with what we call a very green board in the legislature. Fun fact for those of you familiar with the legislature, I had to govern in COVID, so I had to do Zoom presentations in committee and everything. The very first bill I ever presented in real life was this bill to the Ways and Means Committee, so no pressure at all. But I passed this bill with complete bipartisan support. People came at this from all angles. We had people like myself who believed in this. And then I had people like Representative Miller who believed we were going to overturn abortion rights and there'd be all these babies who needed homes. And so we had to do something about it. So everyone came at this from their different angles of why they believed in it. And when we passed it, it was bipartisan. So I like to say I grew government with Republicans, and not a lot of Democrats can say that. So that was an exciting day for me because it was for the right reasons. The other reason that was important is because the kids led that. So foster kids came to me and foster kids led that. And I mention this because that's part of the work that I do, is that I allow and I invite and welcome children who are in these systems to tell us what they think we can do better. And so I'm working currently on a bill that they've come up with, which is a foster bill of rights. They want to know that when a foster goes to, they don't have family, to a home where they're not familiar, that they have access to food that they will actually eat. We all know kids can be picky eaters, and we all know that kids who are already in trauma can go further into their trauma if they don't get access to something as simple as food that they like, right? And there's no need to push a kid to run away just because they're being told they have to eat vegetables, right? If that's just not what they like. So finding a way to kind of meet in the middle there. So I'll be working on that next year. So over the years, we kept working on this. The next chapter of what I took on was to really work on aligning our national our laws with national standards. So in the early 2000s, we as a country passed something called the Family Preservation, Family First Act, if you've heard of that. Title IV dollars. It's what allows us to get matched funding from the federal government for these types of services. So it's not entirely on the states to fund it. Now, Minnesota is someone we send more money to the feds than we get back, so it doesn't always come out in the wash, but it does help out, and I'll talk about that in a second. But aligning with Family First was important because we wanted to make sure that we were had programs so we could draw down those dollars and have programs that allowed that intervention kind of one-on-one with families. We know prevention is important, so preventing abuse, preventing neglect is the best way to address our child protection system. And so this allowed us to do that. we had a system, for example, if you were a family that was not involved in child protection, your home was safe, your kids were safe, but your child needed intense chemical dependency treatment or mental health treatment. There was a time in Minnesota where we told those families, well, just give us your kid, put them in child protection, give us custody as a state of your kid, and then we will use those Title 40 dollars to pay for that for you. That felt really backwards to me. I was a kid that needed those kinds of services and my family couldn't afford it. And I remember sitting at a treatment center and the counselor having this conversation with my mom, who provided as much as she could. I was safe enough at home. I probably could have used some help, but and they said, well, you can put her in this system. And I heard, put your kid up for adoption because you can't, she's, you don't want her anymore. Like, right, as a troubled kid, that's what I heard. And that stayed with me for many, many, many years until I got into the legislature and I learned the dynamics of why that was happening. And so when I thought about at 15 years old, when I heard that, now I was 35 when I heard this, 20 years later, that trauma had stayed with me, that I thought my mom didn't want me that whole time, that she was willing to put me up for adoption and to get rid of me. And I knew what that did to me as someone who's resilient and successful and can overcome a lot of this stuff. I can't imagine what that would do for, the average kid who doesn't have that kind of privilege in their life. So I made sure I changed that. So we created what's called the third door, kind of a complicated policy thing, but we got rid of that practice so that kids don't have to hear that from anybody ever again. And then we want to align with these national standards. So out of the Family First Act, then we came up with the Adam Walsh standards. We've all heard the horrible stories of children who were taken from their homes and ended up in a foster situation where they were assaulted, either physically or sexually. They were trafficked, either physically, sexually, labor trafficking or drug trafficking, or they were just abused by the adults in the home. That's the worst case scenario for everybody. And I've never met anyone who thought that was just a reasonable consequence for everything else. And so the Adam Walsh standards, Adam Walsh was a child who didn't get those services and we lost him that way. And so we want to align our laws with those standards. So one, for example, standard that we are not aligned with is if anybody was ever charged with a first-degree assault ever in their life, they can never, ever, ever take on responsibilities for any child, right? Ever. They can never be a kin placement. They can never do that. So if you got in a bar fight at 21 years old, and then 50 years later, your grandbaby needs somewhere to go, you can't be that person. And that's, we feel like, not appropriate. That should not be a permanent bar that stops. Now, if you got charged with a first-degree assault last week, and it's your 15th one, and right now kids come up, that's probably not a good such situation. So it doesn't mandate that it does it, but it gives the judge and the court's discretion to be able to move in that. That can't happen in Minnesota right now. And that first-degree assault bar, it's called, is the number one reason that kids get separated from their families or someone else. Most often it happens where there's a multi-generational household. Grandma lives there, maybe her sons live there, and then a grandbaby needs to come. If one of the sons has a first-degree assault, that baby also can't live there. So rather than the system helping maybe find housing for this other person outside of the home so that the child could be in a safe place, we just don't even go down that path with families. So these are really nuanced situations, but they're pretty common in our system. The other thing I talked about is how we ended up with this really racist system, and it was kind of a double-edged sword, right? On one side, it was because we're one of the only states that tracks it, right? And so the absence of data can sometimes be like a cover for what other states might be doing. And sometimes the evidence of data can sometimes be the crux that we have to grapple with. And so the challenge that our system has faced is that we use a data system, like an IT system, that is a DOS system. So you have to F1, F2 your way through a green screen, right? And that's what every child protection worker in the state of Minnesota and every single family court system right now is navigating. And that is absurd. Unfortunately, in Minnesota, we can't bond for IT because of what our Constitution says. So if that option ever comes up on your ballot, please vote for it, because these are things that we could fix with that. So this replacing the system entirely, the quote I got for it was $100 million. And that feels like monumental, right? Like, how do you find $100 million for any project, like an infrastructure project? I mean, this building probably didn't even cost that much to build, right? And let alone an IT system that's very ambiguous and intangible to most of the population. So I did what any good single mom would do. And the first year I put away $10 million. I stuck it away in a little account, which is abnormal for those of you in the legislature. You don't usually like stick away money and hide it for the next year. But I did that because it's 10 million was what I could get my hands on during the trifecta. And that was frustrating because my party had all this power, all this money, and like it wasn't, people weren't understanding how important this system was. So I knew I needed to do better at that. So then the next session we come back, obviously y'all know we were in a deficit. I thought, oh, there's no way I'm getting this money. And so I just kind of swung for the fences and said, I'm going to just raise the alarm anyway. I'm going to do what I'm good at. And I got the Republican Party on board. I had a couple of friends over there who knew how important this is. It saves taxpayer money at the county level. It saves a lot of people time and energy. We have, caseworkers put in their notes. Really, they've met with a family, really deep emotional notes they put in, and then the system will just delete it. And then they got to start all over. And we can't do reporting. We can't see where a kid is sometimes or what they've been through. And so I talked to my Republican colleagues and they agreed that this was important for kind of responsible government. We could shrink government a little bit, maybe have fewer workers that didn't have to spend 50% of their time managing an IT system. So for their values, it aligned. And I thought, there's no way, we're in a deficit. I'm never going to get $40 million like I need, right? There's a federal match for 50%. Right, so that was out there. So I knew I could get 50 there if I could come up with 50 here. All of a sudden, one day, I heard from the Republican Party that it was in their top 3 priorities. Each party had come up with top 3 priorities, and it was in their top 3. And my team came to me and they're like, what is this thing? And I told them what it was, and they made it one of their priorities. And so by the end of session, in a deficit, we managed to find $40 million more to replace the system for the sake of our kids. And so this is huge for the child protection system because being able to provide this system update will allow us to provide better services for our kids. It'll make our county systems work better, our justice system work better, our judicial system, all of it will go better. We'll be able to integrate restorative practices for kids who get involved in the police system when they, criminal activity or fighting or anything that ends them up in a criminal courtroom. We'll be able to intervene better with the system by identifying those kids in a more data kind of conglomerate way. So that's what we're going to keep doing. We're going to keep fighting for that sort of stuff and to make sure that kids can be safe here in Minnesota. So that's what I have to say about that. Yeah. I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any. The new system will probably be implemented within the next 2 to 5 years. I put pretty strict criteria in there for what I want as far as what features it should do, who should get to talk about this. We have 11 tribes in Minnesota. Some of them are what's called initiative tribes, like Red Lake, White Earth, a couple others, where they do their own child protection on the res, and they need to be able to do it too. So they'll be adding information there. The African American Family Preservation and Disproportionality Act passed this year. We call it MAPL. And what that says is that we can't just be terminating people's parental rights out of just kind of willy-nilly like we have been in a way because a foster family wants to adopt a kid. Like that should not be the driving force for creating families to terminate someone's parental rights. We should do everything we can to support a family, get them on the services, get them to work, get them jobs, get them whatever they need, get them classes, emotional support, therapy, chemical dependency treatment, whatever, first. And we should do that. And then we won't be terminating parental rights anymore. We'll do what's called TPLPCs. So they're temporary permanent legal placement, I can't remember the acronym. But we'll be doing more of those in Minnesota going forward too, which is kind of a complicated thing. But yeah, so that launches next month. And so we need to make sure that, next January, and then we need to be ready to implement that. So the system will help with that. So we'll be able to track where we're failing kids and where we're not keeping kids with their family or within their culture. Yeah.
How many children are served by this?
It's interesting. We don't even know because the system won't let us track it. So every single kid that's in child protection, there's 2 things. There's like a child investigation where like we know something's happened and we're now investigating, right? And then there's a screening. So there's 2 ways we go with this. And so we don't have a way to track how many go from screening to investigation yet? And that's what this new system is going to allow us to. We're like operating, I'm seriously, on like 90s technology, so we can't do a lot of the reporting that taxpayers and people expect out of it. Sucks.
So how often does the system of contacting family or
Mhm.
friend as opposed to going to the,
Mhm.
how often do the kids, what's the success rate of that program?
Well, another thing that I can't track, right? These are all questions I had too. Like, how do we know how effective a prevention effort is? If we get a family hooked up with, in Scott County, we have the Family Resource Center, which will help families understand. I mean, one of the biggest things we see is, the controversy around like spankings, whoopings, right? What's the line? How far is that? Is there a cultural line to that? Like, what is that? And this, like, these family resource centers can sit down with families and have those conversations and help them understand that. How effective is it? I don't even know because I can't get the data out of the system. How often do kin placements work? That's what, with family outside of like the other legal parents, right? So if mom has the kid has to be taken, then there's dad. Like, that's just a parental, change. Kin is anybody else, right? We don't even know. I can't even get the data on it, which is why I had to prioritize getting this system, is so we can start to get those answers. Because I was just kind of spinning my wheels, guessing at what I needed to do. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome. Yes.
Thank you for being here today.
Oh, yes.